They called her the wallflower of West Point Echo Base because she never spoke unless directly addressed and kept her eyes low even when officers passed. But there was something about Ilara Knox that always made people nervous without knowing why. Maybe it was the way she never flinched when the sirens went off during drills, or how her hands moved with mechanical precision on every task, whether replacing thermal cores in faulty recon drones or hauling power cells like they weighed nothing. And maybe it was the silence in her eyes, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. But whatever it was, it came to a head the day a visiting command unit arrived from the Capital Division, led by General Harland Voss himself, a man whose reputation preceded him like a thunderclap and whose presence always meant something hidden was being inspected under the guise of routine. Ilara didn't notice him at first because she was buried beneath the engine of a grounded Vortex-class shuttle trying to realign the plasma feeds by touch alone. But he noticed her, not her face at first, but her hand, or more specifically the mark on it, a burned-in brand, barely visible beneath engine grease and time. And he stopped so suddenly that even his adjutant tripped trying to avoid slamming into him from behind. Because that brand, a half-burnt crescent intersected by a broken arrow, wasn't just ink, it was a signature, and the last time Harlan had seen it, it had been on the wrist of a girl dragged into a blast shelter 12 years ago during an operation that had gone so far south it had been scrubbed from the records and turned into a ghost story whispered in the halls of classified intelligence. Ilara Knox had been 15, missing for 3 months, presumed dead, until someone had found her alone and silent beside the wreckage of Echo Ridge, cradling a sealed canister and too traumatized to speak for weeks. She'd been relocated, renamed, and quietly folded into the military system, under a path reserved for those the world didn't want to remember but couldn't afford to lose. The crescent arrow mark was seared onto the skin of every child who survived. Facility Cibola Black Site, meant for training psychotactical operatives capable of disrupting neural fields without needing implants or gear. A place so secret that even its name was redacted from redacted files, and Ilara had been their brightest, or rather, their darkest. Because her ability wasn't strength or speed or even psychic control, it was suppression, total emotional nullification, the power to deaden fear, to dissolve rage, to flatten the emotional spectrum of those around her without touching them. And that power had been used once in a field op that went catastrophically wrong when her handler lost control and the entire squadron turned on each other in a bloodbath no one ever fully explained. Harlan Voss had been there, not officially, but as an observer of last resort, and he'd watched as Ilara stood in the middle of the chaos, untouched, eyes wide but empty, the crescent arrow mark still smoking on her wrist from a failed extraction code burned into her with a soldering tool. He'd filed the final report himself, claiming she hadn't survived the blast wave that followed, but now here she was, older, quieter, unnoticed until today, when the past slammed into the present with the force of a hidden war. Harlan approached, eyes locked on the mark, and said nothing at first, but Ilara felt it before she saw him, the familiar ripple of focused attention that once meant someone was about to decide her fate without telling her. She slid from under the shuttle, slowly, stood to her full height, taller than expected, and faced him not directly but diagonally, just enough to keep escape options visible, a habit drilled into her during a childhood spent evading shadows in her sleep. The voice came low and gravel-heavy. "Do you remember me?" And she didn't answer because the answer was too complicated. Instead, she turned her wrist slightly, letting the mark catch the light, and watched as something ancient collapsed in his eyes. Not fear, not guilt, something older, tangled in regret. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but not to her. More to the ghosts that followed him into every new deployment, and she replied evenly, "Neither should you." And the air thickened like the moment before a voltage surge. His adjutant started to step forward, but Harlan held up a hand. "Walk with me," he ordered, and she followed, not because she had to, but because he didn't lie, not with his tone. They walked through the base, past murmuring recruits and drone-scouted towers, into the old mess hall no one used since the new commissary was built. And there, alone, he sat down and laid a datapad on the table, unlocked with a AAA code and a blood scan. And when she saw the file open, she stopped breathing for just a second, because it wasn't hers, it was his, Harlan Voss's, classified profile, the one he used for shadow missions and silent assassinations, and inside it was a folder titled Operation Ember Artery, a mission buried 10 years ago that had no survivors, no debrief, only one photo attached, a photo of her, Ilara, standing barefoot on the edge of a crater, holding something to her chest while a squad of helmeted soldiers approached with rifles lowered, and in the background a single flag burned sideways in the wind. "They've started waking them," Harlan said. "Sable-trained units, not just you. All of you." And Ilara's eyes narrowed. "Who's they?" And Harlan's answer changed everything. "Us," he said. "Our side, not the enemy. Our own defense executive board." And the nausea that rolled through Ilara wasn't fear. It was inevitability. Because she'd known the moment she felt the pulse 6 nights ago, a vibration deep in her spine that no one else Registered, a frequency used only during extraction initiation for psychic dampeners. They were activating the remaining assets, not to rescue them but to deploy them like weapons, and she said it out loud. "They're not bringing us back," she whispered. "They're finishing the job," and Harlan didn't deny it. Because he couldn't. He'd fought for years to keep her name buried, along with the others. But now someone higher had decided they were useful again, and Alara understood that the only reason she was still alive was because someone hadn't found her yet. But that window was closing, fast. "You need to disappear," he said, sliding her a chip encoded with off-grid coordinates and forged clearance codes. But she didn't take it, because disappearing hadn't worked the first time, and now it would just delay the next victim. "How many are active?" she asked, and he hesitated, which was enough of an answer to many, and to spread out to stop by herself, but not too far to warn. Not if she moved now. And so she reached into her collar, pulled out the chain she hadn't touched in years, and unclasped the locket at the end, revealing a micro-emitter sewn inside, still dormant, still waiting, and Harlan's breath caught. "That's a recall key," he said, stunned, and she nodded. "Not for them, for us." And before he could argue, she pressed the emitter against the datapad and activated the signal, one she'd hardwired herself the night before Facility Sable burned, a signal that would reach the ones still hiding, still alive, still hoping they hadn't been forgotten. And across 4 continents, in deep bunkers, maintenance facilities, sub-level archives and forgotten strongholds, scattered survivors of the Crescentero program paused as the signal flared across their neural tags, old memories sparking like live wires. And the message was simple, 3 words, burned into every retina display. "We are awake," and within hours the silent wave began. Not an attack, not a rebellion, just motion, deliberate, coordinated, undeniable, as one by one. The forgotten weapons of a forgotten war emerged from the shadows not as soldiers, but as truths, as witnesses to what had been done in the name of security, of control, and Alara stood at the center of it all, not leading, but reminding them they were more than the fear built into their bones. Harlan watched her go, said nothing, just saluted as she passed, not out of duty but remorse, and when she disappeared into the desert dust of West Point Echo's perimeter, he knew he would never see her again, but he also knew something else: the war they had buried. It had not ended, it had only gone quiet, and now, it had found its voice again.